Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. And today on the show, we have a two-part special with our good buddy over at Yahoo Sports, Jeff Eisenberg. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Final Four. I mean, that's still on the tip of everyone's tongue here after North Carolina and South Carolina set the field on Sunday. But then we are going to talk about Player of the Year and a little bit of Coach of the Year stuff as well. Both Jeff and I have a vote this year for different awards. He has a wooden vote. I have a Naismith vote. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to kind of go through the candidates here and decide who we are going to vote for, or at least, maybe get closer to deciding who we're going to vote for, because this is a tough race, isn't it, Jeff?
I think it's really tough. I mean, usually at the very most, you have two guys, like I thought Buddy Hield and Denzel Valentine last year were obviously 1A and 1B, and you either made a case for one or made a case for the other, and it was pretty simple. Some years, it's just clear cut that there's one guy. I think this year there's a minimum of four, and I don't think the NCAA tournament has helped us very much at all in determining between those four.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. But Jeff was over in San Jose for the West Region Final and the West Regional Semifinals this weekend, and got a chance to see Gonzaga clinch its first Final Four in program history. He also wrote an awesome piece before the game on Saturday, kind of outlining the small beginnings that this program had, especially in the early 1990s, late 1980s, before Mark Few got there, before Dan Monson got there even. And I guess that the first thing I wanted to ask you about was just how historic do you think that Gonzaga getting to a Final Four is just within the general ecosystem of college basketball?
I think it's one of the better stories that we've encountered in college basketball in a long time, and not necessarily that this team in particular has gotten to a Final Four. I think it's more just the overall growth of the Gonzaga program from where it was when this run started 20 years ago to where it is today. I mean, it is night and day different. Between the plucky little underdog that got to the Elite Eight in 1999, and then this team now finally getting to a Final Four and getting Gonzaga over that hump. I mean, like the program in 1999 was only a couple years removed from its former head coach Dan Fitzgerald basically telling its staff that they couldn't recruit anyone with a Pac-10 scholarship offer because they thought it was a waste of time. There was no way that they were going to ever get a kid who had an offer to Oregon or to Stanford or Washington or whatever. Mark Few as an assistant was kind of instrumental in basically butting heads enough with Fitzgerald to get him to loosen that approach. And I don't even mean to necessarily criticize Dan Fitzgerald, because I can see why he was thinking that way. I mean, Gonzaga had an aging high school-sized facility for a gym. It wasn't located in an area where there was a ton of talent, which it still isn't. They had very, very, very little money, to the point where players had to return their sweats and jerseys at the end of the year like they were a JV team in high school, basically. And in order to get new sneakers, they had to bring them in and prove that there was a hole in the bottom. I mean, to come from that to taking charter flights to every game, charter flights on recruiting trips, the beautiful facilities that they have now. They're building a state-of-the-art practice facility that is going to have a weight room and all sorts of different stuff, a Hall of Fame, training table, nutritionist, strength and conditioning coach, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they have everything that a major conference program has and then some at Gonzaga now, and it's just it's so incredibly different now versus then, and the growth that the program has made is a big reason why Mark Few is there. I mean, pretty much, he has had numerous options to leave for power conference programs, and Gonzaga has continued to grow over the last 20 years and given him reason to stay. And, I think this Final Four is kind of the reward for all that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to kind of talk about Mark Few here, to me, Mark Few's been one of the best, 8 college basketball coaches in the country, regardless of the Final Four. I mean, the way he has built this program, the way that he has been able to not only get the most out of lesser or like quote unquote like unrecruited talent. I think that Mark would probably butt heads with the idea that I would call some of the kids he's had in the past lesser talents, but let's say under-recruited talents and finding the diamonds in the rough that have succeeded there, like a Dan Dickow, a Matt Santangelo, a Casey Calvary, a Josh Heitfeld. Like Gonzaga has had this incredible knack over the years of finding elite players on the college level in places that other programs just haven't. And it's really impressive to me that he's been able to build this program basically from the points that you just mentioned, where they didn't even have personalized jerseys, and you had to prove that there were holes in shoes. And Dan Monson was making under $100,000 in his last year at Gonzaga, and Mark Few is now up over. He's like at $1.5 million. He's probably worth 3 times that as a coach now. It's just totally remarkable to me that he has been able to build this program, and regardless of whether or not he got to the Final Four this year, he was always going to be in that top 8, top stratosphere of coaches, top echelon of coaches within the entire country. But it's really nice that now he's going to get the respect. And I know that it's something that he said in the past, that it matters to him, but it's not the be-all, end-all. I think that if you saw the smile on his face, be it on TV or like Jeff was in person in San Jose, after they won that game and, as he rose that West Region trophy over his face, I mean, the smile on his face, it said so much in terms of just how happy he is to finally accomplish this goal, even if it wasn't the everything to him that some journalists tried to make it out to be in terms of his legacy.
Yeah, I think that he was really happy, not because, it's the missing piece in his legacy, like people like to say. I think he was really more happy, for his players, for his former players, for the Spokane community, for a school that has continued to invest in the program. To me, he was happy because of everyone else, whereas everyone else around him was just elated for him that, one, he'll get the respect that he probably already should have gotten, and 2, that he'll stop having to answer the inane questions, every single year about can he get this program to the Final Four. I mean, it's just silly. 19 straight NCAA tournaments, 9 straight years in the second round, now 3 years in a row, Sweet 16 and beyond. I mean, and the idea that they had underachieved in the NCAA tournament isn't true. You go back and look, they have now, out of the 19 years in this run, they have 14 out of those 19 years have gone to the level or beyond that their seed suggested they should. So, just an amazing coaching career. And hitting on something else that you said, about their ability to find talent. I think it's really interesting the different ways that this roster is assembled and the different ways that Gonzaga rosters have been assembled over the years. It started out with them basically unearthing guys that, nobody else had any interest in. I mean, Matt Santangelo was a little bit of an exception. He got some looks from Stanford, Rice, Northwestern. That was one of the guys that Few kind of had to push to recruit when they might not have previously. But, Casey Calvary, it was between them and Colorado State. Richie Fromm, it was between them and Portland. I mean, these were guys that basically no one on a high level wanted, and they turned out to be the keys to a deep run in the NCAA tournament. And then, moving forward, obviously they've tapped into the international pipeline with Tommy Lloyd. That's been a very valuable, source of talent for them. I still think they're getting some guys who have been overlooked. More recently, they've been able to get some of the top level recruits. Zach Collins, even a Josh Perkins was a 4-star kid, and they've had a handful of those in the last 5 years. And then lastly, I think that their success with the developmental redshirt year has made them just a transfer haven. And I think it started with Kelly Olynyk taking that redshirt year in the middle of his career. I don't think they would have gotten Kyle Wiltshire if it wasn't for that. And then to go from that to getting Nigel Williams-Goss and Jonathan Williams on this team, I think that's become another huge source of talent for them.
Yeah, I mean, the craziest thing is, let's talk about this with Gonzaga, right? Like, Gonzaga has two kids on their bench redshirting right now in Jacob Larson and Zach Norvell, who are top 100 recruits. Like, they are redshirting two top 100 recruits because Norvell, they both had like knee injuries at different times. I think that Larson might still be kind of recovering from his. I think Norvell is probably recovered at this stage from his, but he got such a late start to his season that they decided to redshirt him. I mean, that's a kid that I watched him drop like 50 points in an AAU game the summer before his senior year. He would be playing anywhere right now. And he's redshirting at Gonzaga because of the depth that they have in terms of wings like Silas Melson, who's super athletic, and they were able to go out and get a Jordan Matthews from Cal. This team, and it's something I'm probably going to write about next week, or this coming week, really, at the Final Four. This team is a totally different talent level from what we expect from a mid-major. Like, Gonzaga right now, in terms of what they're bringing to the starting lineup in the front court, they bring Shemek Karnowski, who will play international basketball for years. He might get a shot in the NBA. It wouldn't be a surprise there. And Jonathan Williams, who's like this hyper athlete who played in the SEC. I think he was all freshman SEC, maybe like second team all SEC as a sophomore. And if he wasn't, then he like just missed that team. He comes to Gonzaga and is just like a total freak athlete and can shoot a little bit, and he's bringing so much to the table. Off of the bench, Gonzaga is bringing off a McDonald's All-American who's probably going to be a first-round pick someday, and Killian Tilly, who will play on the French national team for a decade and has a shot to get to the NBA after like 2 years of development at Gonzaga. It is insane, the talent level that this team has, and I think that it's kind of worth mentioning because a lot of the time people wondered, okay, how good is this team given their talent level? Are they just beating up on bad competition? The talent level on this team is wild good. It is insanely good. And they beat up on all of these West Coast Conference teams. They beat up on teams like Florida, Iowa State, Arizona, St. Mary's throughout the year. They can stand with the big boys because they are as talented as the big boys. It's not that they are this overachieving group of mid-major players. This team is high major talent playing at a school that has a mid-major reputation that has turned into a high major school.
Yeah, I mean, it's a high major roster. It's a high major program. It's a high major everything. It just happens to be in the West Coast Conference. I mean, you didn't even mention, Rui Hachimura, who barely plays for them and is, I don't know if he's an NBA prospect, but certainly a guy that NBA scouts are aware of at this point, and he's playing. He's not even a rotation guy for them. So, I mean, yeah, like this is not a collection of overachieving players who have cobbled together an amazing run. This is a very talented team that is a worthy Final Four team in every regard, and has I think just as good a chance as anyone. In Phoenix of winning it all this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, another crazy part of this is, and you don't want to look too far into the future whenever, I mean, let's be honest, South Carolina is their matchup in the Final Four, and I think it's pretty likely that they're going to beat South Carolina and go to the title game and have a chance. They'll probably be favored over either North Carolina or Oregon in a title game. So, like, on some level, you don't want to get too far ahead, but this team next year, they lose Shemek Karnowski. They lose Jordan Matthews. They might lose Zach Collins. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to go. Does he decide to declare for the draft? Would he end up being a top 17 pick or so in the NBA draft? I'm not positive he would be. I think the odds are reasonable that he would be, but I'm not sure on that. They're going to replace those guys, though, with a guy in Zach Norvell, who I just talked about, top 100 recruit who'd play for anyone. Jacob Larson, who was a top 100 recruit, who is going to be super valuable from Denmark. If you remember an NBA draft prospect by the name of Rasmus Larson, who tragically died early. It's his brother, who is, he's a very, very talented kid at like 6'11", 7 foot tall. And then they're going to replace him with Rui Hachimura, who, like you said, is a guy that NBA scouts are excited about. And, maybe Nigel Williams-Goss goes to the NBA, but I don't really think that there are a ton of NBA scouts that are super excited about him. So this team's going to be back next year too. And people should just recognize Mark Few is still building this program to where they're going to hold up with anyone in the country, even though they play in the West Coast Conference. It's not going to matter that, their conference might not have a TV deal or anything like that. Mark Few has built this program to where they're going to be in on high major kids going forward, and this program is still continuing to grow and will be an odds-on favorite to get back to the Final Four next year.
Yeah, I don't think it's a guarantee that Nigel Williams-Goss comes back, since he'll have been in college for 4 years, and potentially this could be a pretty good jumping off point to leave, even if it's not for the NBA. But if he does come back, yeah, I think that clearly this would be a Final Four contender next year, and even if he doesn't come back, they'll still have a very good roster, and they're still set up for success for years to come. No question. This is not a one-year thing. It has never been a one-year thing. Consistency has been, the hallmark of this Gonzaga program over the years. And I think the level of talent and therefore the improvement on defense has kind of gone up and up the last, 4 years or so. And as a result, you're seeing Gonzaga go from a perennial NCAA tournament team to more of a team that's a perennial threat to make a Final Four.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about the other West Coast team. It's the first time that two teams from the Western time zone, the Pacific time zone, Western time zone is not a real thing, is it, Jeff? It is the Pacific time zone. Will be in the Final Four at the same time. Oregon, I feel like I kind of gave Oregon the short shrift on the podcast on Sunday night with Aaron Torres. So let's talk about the Ducks. What do you like about this Oregon team that everyone knows they're athletic. Everyone knows that they're super skilled. Tyler Dorsey's rolling. Dylan Brooks is really good. What do you think is their biggest calling card going into this NCAA Final Four?
It's a good question. I think athleticism is definitely one of them. I think Tyler Dorsey peaking at the right time and Jordan Bell playing his best basketball of the season has been huge for them. But if I had to say one thing, I might say toughness, honestly. I think they feed off of the energy of Dylan Brooks a lot, and also Jordan Bell to an extent too. I just see some will in both of those kids, and Tyler Dorsey too to an extent, where it takes a lot of toughness to come back like they did against Rhode Island, to finish off Michigan in a game that they nearly lost, and then to basically play a true road game against Kansas, where Kansas threw everything at them in the second half to try to come back in that game. They were clearly drained coming down the stretch, and yet they still made the big plays and the big shots at the end, especially Tyler Dorsey and Jordan Bell. To finish that game off, which was, to me anyway, probably the best win that anybody had in the entire NCAA tournament, given how good Kansas is and the fact that was, basically Allen Fieldhouse 100 miles to the west. So, I like a lot about this Oregon team. I have all year, I know that we had talked about it before. The Chris Boucher injury we thought was costly, but not necessarily crushing, and I think that's been proven true over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm kind of glad that kind of bore itself out because. And, I don't want to crush a kid like Chris Boucher, who's gone through a lot and is a really good college basketball player. But I do think that the novelty of his game kind of overstates what his actual contribution is. Do you think that's right?
I think he had value in the sense that he spaced the floor and created driving lanes for them. I think, having a second shot blocker where, if there was a player who could bring Jordan Bell away from the basket, you still had rim protection there. I thought that was valuable. Obviously, the way that he ran the floor was a good fit. But I still think Oregon's best lineup all season has been 4 guards surrounding Jordan Bell. And if this means that you see that lineup more in the NCAA tournament, which I think it has, it's not the worst thing for Oregon. So it hurts them. It hurts their versatility, hurts their depth, certainly. There's more importance in guys not getting into foul trouble now, which they've been able to avoid. But I didn't think it was the season-killing, crushing injury that some people made it out to be at the time, and obviously that's been proven to be the case.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that this matchup against North Carolina is actually going to accentuate what having Chris Boucher can bring, because North Carolina is going to run 2 bigs the entire game. They're going to just try and destroy Oregon on the offensive glass and see what happens, because if you look at Oregon, I think that their one weakness this year has probably been the defensive glass. They're 180th in the country in defensive rebounding rate. They were 9th in the Pac-12 this year in defensive rebounding rate. So that's a little bit scary. I think it's kind of a bad matchup for them in that capacity. Do you think that beyond that single offensive rebounding matchup, though, that Oregon has the kind of matchup on the perimeter to give, North Carolina some issues? Because I think that they do.
I think it's really similar to the matchups with Duke for North Carolina in a lot of ways. And not that Oregon and Duke are identical teams by any means, but like the idea that the key to the Duke games was, could Jason Tatum take advantage of his matchup offensively enough to make up for the fact that they were going to get crushed on the offensive glass? I think it's, can Dillon Brooks take advantage of his matchup of the offensive end and that mismatch that he's going to have with a second North Carolina big enough to make up for the fact that they're probably going to get beat up on the boards a little bit. There are obviously other factors there. I mean, there are other matchups that Oregon will, I'm sure, try to exploit, but I think that's the key to the whole game is who benefits more from that mismatch. Yeah,
I kind of agree with you that Dillon Brooks is, and you didn't really say this, but I think Dillon Brooks is the most important player in this game. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. That was essentially what I was hinting at.
Yeah, I didn't want to put words in your mouth necessarily, but I think he's the most important player in this game. And the crazy thing about Oregon is Dillon Brooks was like an All-American this season. If you made me guess, he'll be like on the second team All-America for most outlets. He's been the 3rd best player for them in the NCAA tournament, and Tyler Dorsey and Jordan Bell have just been total monsters. Jordan Bell particularly has made a rather big leap. He was, I think that I was probably among the first people to say, like, this dude is 100% the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. And he is, kind of shown that throughout the year. He can guard the perimeter. He's a really good shot blocker. He does a lot for them inside. But he's made the leap from, like, really good regional defensive player that, maybe hurts you a little bit on offense to a 2-way player that is also now probably the best defensive player in the entire country because of the way he's shutting down the paint and able to kind of go out on the perimeter and cut off penetration and pick and rolls, or switch on to players if he has to, and do a wide variety of things defensively. Like, Jordan Bell has become just a wild good player for Oregon over the course of the last month.
Yeah, I thought he was the best player in the regional, and that's taking nothing away from Tyler Dorsey, who was outstanding. But Tyler Dorsey was outstanding in somewhat of a one-dimensional way. Maybe that's a little too strong, but his shooting is huge for Oregon. But that's what he was bringing for the most part, and a little bit of driving ability too. Whereas, Jordan Bell was a monster at both ends of the court. He played Morris Wagner out of the game against Michigan, basically down the stretch.
That's top 20 NBA draft prospect Moritz Wagner, by chance. Just wanted to throw that out there.
You're right, exactly. And then, against Kansas, one of the keys with Kansas is that, when they drive on you and you have to collapse against them, that's when they kick out for all the threes. Well, Oregon didn't really have to collapse that much because Jordan Bell controlled the paint so well and was able to alter shots at the rim without them having to give up uncontested threes because of it. So, I thought he was clearly the best player in those 2 games. And the idea that they have been able to do this with Dylan Brooks being pretty pedestrian, it's scary because, if he has one of his better games in the Final Four and then you keep Jordan Bell playing at this level and Tyler Dorsey making shots and being a secondary offensive weapon for them, that's a pretty tough out.
Yeah, so Tyler Dorsey now has 20-plus points in 7 straight games. You don't do this full-time or anything, but do you think that he can play in the NBA? Because I've been trying to figure out whether or not I think he is just such a special scorer that he can do it. I'm not 100% there yet, but I'm getting closer every game, and it's more and more difficult for me to say that no, he can't, whenever he continues to just efficiently put up points constantly. And even though he's not playing point guard, really, he's just scoring and scoring more and creating offense for himself. Do you think that he can bring that to an NBA team, or do you think that the lack of athleticism will hinder him a bit too much?
I've been burned by, thinking that other guys who are essentially undersized shooting guards, kind of like what he is, that it will translate to the NBA level, and then you see him up against 6'6" guys who are more athletic than them, and they can't get a shot off. So I'm not going to say he definitely can, but I'll say this. He's had 7 straight 20-point games against some pretty good teams that they've been facing. It's Arizona in the Pac-12 tournament title game, a Cal team that defends really well in the semis, and then their 4 NCAA tournament opponents certainly have all had high major caliber talent, and other than Iona, I guess, but he's been doing it against very good teams. He's shown an ability to get by people with his first step, finish through contact at the rim. Obviously, he has great range on his jumper. I think the knock on him over his career is that, when he's hot, he's very, very tough to stop, but he's been streaky and inconsistent at times, and Oregon has obviously benefited from the fact that his hot streak this year has coincided with their most important games of the season. I'm not going to say he isn't an NBA player, but I definitely think he's going to get a look. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, he's one of those guys that could just decide to go undrafted and find his own spot, kind of like Yogi Ferrell did this offseason. Yogi Ferrell had options to get drafted. Teams asked him, will you sign a deal with us that is advantageous to us if you get drafted? And Yogi was just like, no, I don't really want to do that. I think Dorsey could go undrafted this year because of that. He could go late first round. He could get drafted and decide, hey, this is the right situation for me. He's going to be a very volatile prospect around NBA teams because a lot of them just don't buy into smaller shooting guards, essentially, translating and, providing enough defensive value to be worth selecting whenever there are guys that could potentially be two-way players that can really, really make an impact, be available in the second round. So Dorsey's a tough one. I think that he's going to be very situational in the NBA, and I would like to see him succeed. I would. I think that he's a really interesting kid if you've talked to him. He's very smart, and he holds a conversation with you really, really well whenever he's talking about basketball. You can tell he's just one of those guys that thinks the game constantly. There's very, very little else in his life that is important. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. He's a good conversation when it comes to breaking down a game or describing the next matchup. The other thing, he obviously has that experience with the Greek national team, so I'm not sure he would be afraid at all to go overseas and go to Europe. Yeah. You never know what a kid is going to do, but if you're ever going to leave, a Final Four run where you've scored 20 or more in 7 straight games, that's a pretty good launching point for you, even if you're not going to be a first-round pick, most likely.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Let's pay some bills here. First, we got MyBookie. It's time to talk to you about the boatload of money you're going to make this week during the Final Four, betting at mybookie.ag. We have some NIT games, too. We have CIT games, CBI games, I think. I don't even know if those tournaments are over yet or not. You can bet on college basketball all week is the point here. And if you haven't checked out mybookie.ag, this is the perfect time to get into the action. The madness of March is here. Lay down some money and score big on college hoops. Join me and thousands of online players and start betting at mybookie.ag. I would only recommend a service that has been good to me and our listeners. That's why I urge you to make your way to MyBookie. You win, they pay, fast and without any hassles. They even have in-game live betting, so you can place a bet after tip-off. You are wasting your time betting anywhere else, to be honest. Join now, and MyBookie will match your first deposit with a 50% bonus. That's right. If you join with $100, you will get an extra $50 to play with. Use the promo code THEORY, THEORY, to activate that offer. Visit MyBookie today or call 844-900-BETS. That's BETS. Play, win, and get paid at mybookie.ag. Second sponsor here, SeatGeek. The college basketball season's in full swing. If you're looking for seats down at the Final Four in Glendale, in Phoenix, SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to your favorite team's games. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing like being in the stadium for the biggest plays of the year, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and it is by far the easiest way I have found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I am excited for the college basketball season to end so I can go finally check out some playoff hockey. There's nothing like playoff hockey either, and SeatGeek is going to be what I use to go see some of that down here in Los Angeles. Best of all, my listeners get a $20 rebate off of their first SeatGeek purchase. To get your $20 rebate on tickets, download the SeatGeek app, go to the settings tab, and click add a promo code. Enter the promo code GameTheory, GAME, THEORY, all one word. SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Again, that's download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code GameTheory today. All right, Jeff, do you want to take some time to talk about Player of the Year now that we have talked enough about West Coast basketball?
We can do that, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so like I said at the top, you have a Wooden vote. I have a Naismith vote. The Naismith vote has narrowed down to 4 names. It's Josh Hart, Frank Mason, Lonzo Ball, Caleb Swanigan. Has the Wooden Award done something similar?
It has not, to my knowledge, although I must admit I have not looked at what it has narrowed down to. But I mean, I think that those are the 4 guys that I would be choosing from regardless. I think Nigel Williams-Goss had a great season at Gonzaga. I think Dylan Brooks has had a great year at Oregon. I think that Luke Kennard was terrific at Duke, but at some point, I think that those 4 guys have kind of separated themselves a little bit, and I think the choice is amongst those 4.
Yeah, I think that that's probably fair. Who would you have at number 4 out of that group?
I would probably have Caleb Swanigan at number 4, and I know he has amazing numbers. The points and the rebounds that he's been able to put up at Purdue have been remarkable, and obviously he's been the key to that whole team with the attention that he draws and what that frees up for their shooters, behind the arc. But to me, I just would put him slightly below the other 3 of Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, and Frank Mason.
So the way that this kind of breaks down for me is I think that these candidates are kind of in 2 tiers. I would have Lonzo Ball and Caleb Swanigan in that second tier and Josh Hart and Frank Mason in the top tier. Do you think that kind of follows?
I would probably have Lonzo. I don't know. I don't know if I could separate them into tiers, but I would probably have Lonzo second, so I guess I can't say that.
Okay. So let's talk about Swanigan first, because we both have Swanigan 4th. Swanigan averaged 18.5 points, 12.5 rebounds, 3 assists per game. Those are just wild numbers. You throw in the fact that he shot 53% from the field, 45% from 3 on like a non-insignificant amount of attempts. He was taking over 2 3-point attempts per game. Free throw percentage near 80%. Those are just crazy numbers for a center / like power forward. He essentially played center most of the year for Purdue. There are 2 things that make me put him 4th that I don't think that you can tie to the other players as much. So first, I would point to turnovers. He has a 18.5 turnover percentage. He's turned it over 3.4 times per game. That's a lot for a guy like him who, he had the ball in his hands a lot, but he's also a big guy to where you would not expect that number to be as high. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm guessing the other thing you're going to say is at the defensive end.
Yeah, so the defensive end was a pretty significant problem. If you watched, we can point to their 2 NCAA tournament games. You can point to their game against Maryland. You can point to, I'm trying to think of like other situations with a lot of pretty heavy. The Michigan game, particularly, Moritz Wagner, hashtag top 20 pick Moritz Wagner, really caused a lot of problems for Caleb Swanigan. And Michigan's spread offense caused a lot of problems for Caleb Swanigan both times they played in the Big Ten tournament and in the regular season at the end of February. So Villanova, too. That's a really good example as well. Yep. There were a lot of examples this season where teams would essentially just attack Swanigan constantly defensively. They'd put him into space, they'd make him guard pick and rolls, and I went through and, charted the Maryland game. I think he was responsible for giving up something like 27 points in the half court in pick and roll settings with Melo Trimble and, either DeMonte Dodd or Michael Tchaikovsky or, not necessarily like elite level pick and roll talent next to Melo Trimble. And, he just struggled. He couldn't contain anyone. And I think that you saw that against Kansas, certainly. Kansas in the second half was just taking turns with Frank Mason, Devontae Graham, Josh Jackson just attacking him relentlessly and making him guard in space, and he didn't show that he could do it. And then you saw it in a different way against Iowa State, where Iowa State's comeback was largely hinged around Deontay Burton constantly attacking him, beating him off the dribble, not in pick and roll settings, but just in settings where he was on the wing and taking it and grabbing it and going against Caleb Swanigan. So the defense for me is the biggest factor. The turnovers are a minor factor. But I would still have Caleb Swanigan as a first-team All-American. Anytime that you put up the offensive numbers that he did and lead Purdue to a Big Ten title and a Sweet 16, on a roster that I don't love the talent on that roster. I think it's good. I don't think it's elite by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's a very deserving first-team All-American that falls short in the Player of the Year voting.
Yeah, I'm almost exclusive. I'm almost entirely with you on that. I think the defensive end of the court is the difference between him and some of the other guys on this list. And you can argue that Lonzo wasn't a world beater defensively, but we saw some times during the season, some stretches where he certainly showed his potential on that side of the ball. And I don't think he was nearly the weakness that Swanigan was for Purdue.
Right, and part of that is UCLA did a reasonably good job of hiding him a lot of the time. Yeah. He would be third for me. Let's talk about who you have third first, though.
I'd have Josh Hart third, and I know you probably disagree with me on this one. I mean, look, can you make a case for Josh Hart as the National Player of the Year? Absolutely. They played at a little bit of a slower pace than some of the other teams, so I think his numbers, when you look at per 40, get a little bit better than they might look on hand. They essentially had a 6.5-man rotation all season, and yet they were still Big East champions and, arguably the best team in the country going into the NCAA tournament. I think Josh Hart took steps forward with the way that he shot the ball. I think he was a better player at both ends of the floor this year than he was last year when he was an integral piece of their title run. Look, he's absolutely, without question, a first-team All-American. I absolutely would entertain the case for him as National Player of the Year, but I would have him third behind Mason and Lonzo Ball.
Okay, so you have Frank Mason 1. Let's just throw it out on the table since you've kind of mentioned everyone so far. You have Frank Mason 1, Lonzo Ball 2, Josh Hart 3, and Caleb Swanigan 4. So
correct.
Let's talk about Lonzo because I have Lonzo at 3. Lonzo he led the country in assists this year. He totally transformed what UCLA did offensively this year. He, there's just not enough superlatives that you can say about the way Lonzo Ball affected UCLA and affected the rest of his teammates. He created a culture of unselfishness. And I think that you can point to TJ Leaf and say, like, hey, Lonzo was not the only addition on this roster. TJ Leaf, in his own right, I think has a good chance to be a first-round pick this offseason. And, Bryce Alford, moving him off ball was a really big factor in making him a more efficient and better college basketball player. But for Lonzo, to me, he just wasn't a guy that you could count on outside of, I believe it was the Oregon game where he had that late layup to kind of seal it. He wasn't a guy that you could count on to get his own shot late in the shot clock. He created a lot of them for teammates, certainly. But for a point guard, I want a guy that you can have the ball with late in the shot clock, and it's why I think a lot of people have a little bit of concern with Lonzo Ball in the NBA. You want a guy where late in the shot clock you can throw it in his hands and say, go get me a basket. Lonzo, you could do that and he would get an efficient shot for someone, but it wasn't always for him. And to me, he was just a little bit less impactful than the other two. You look at his numbers, he was 14.6 points in I believe definitely a higher number of possessions than Josh Hart, probably a couple more possessions than Frank Mason as well, although Kansas certainly played up-tempo basketball this year. He led the country in assists. That's fantastic, no doubt. But you look at per 100 possession numbers on sportsreference.com because I like to shout out the work that they do there. They do great stuff. He was 22.4 points per 100 possessions. That is a pretty low number, to be honest. I mean, you look at what Swanigan did. Swanigan was at 32.4 points per 100 possessions. Josh Hart was at 34.3 points per 100 possessions. Frank Mason was up there, a way higher number as well. Lonzo Ball, certainly, again, a first-team All-American. He did so much for UCLA this year, and I know that harping on the idea of scoring for a guy who led the country in assists and acts as a primary distributor probably won't sit well with a lot of people, but I think whenever you throw in the scoring minor deficiencies on this level, on this elite of the elite level, to pair with the fact that he wasn't a two-way player this year, he was probably on the whole, a slightly below average defender that at times morphed into an above average defender, but I would say that his effort waned and waxed depending on who he was playing. It's just enough to put him in third for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we agree on a large part of what you said. I think transformative is the best word that I could use to describe Lonzo Ball this season. Like, watching UCLA last year and watching UCLA this year, it was as though you were watching like a different sport, let alone a different team. Like, and I know that there were other players involved, but like TJ Leaf was a good player, very good player, but like TJ Leaf was not transformative for them. Same thing with Ike Enigbagu, whose name I continue to butcher every time I try to say it. But like the idea of why UCLA was so much better this year compared to last year, I mean, that was Lonzo. And, credit to the coaching staff for using him properly and for getting guys in the right spots this year with Bryce moving off ball and, all of those things. But like it was Lonzo. Lonzo was the reason that offense was so difficult to stop. His ability to push the ball forward as quickly as he did and to always be looking to attack in transition, that was what made them so dangerous. I think that his competitiveness rubbed off on other guys. I think his unselfishness rubbed off on other guys. I continue to come back to the word transformative. I agree with you with what you're saying that, like, if Gonzaga needed a basket down the stretch, the ball went to Nigel Williams-Goss, and he created often for himself, sometimes for someone else, but they could count on that. Same thing with Iowa State and Monty Morris, or with Kansas and Frank Mason. I agree that there were times where like you kind of see Lonzo, either looking to create for someone else, or even sometimes like fading into the background late in close games. I mean, you definitely saw it in the Kentucky game. I don't think that he rose to the challenge there. that De'Aaron Fox put out there. And I'm not sure that UCLA would have won that game anyway, but that second half was certainly not his finest hour, albeit perhaps with a hamstring injury. So yeah, again, I can definitely see the case for Lonzo second, third, or fourth for some of the reasons that you mentioned. I think he's clearly a first-team All-American. It's a shame that the end of his season kind of got overshadowed by his dad's bluster and bravado and all of that, because that's not the kid that he is. And I think that we'll probably see that going forward at the next level.
Yeah. I don't really want to get into more LeVar Ball talk, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've talked enough about it.
I agree.
So let's chat Frank Mason. I have Frank Mason at 2 and Josh Hart at 1. So I will throw out there right now, I have Josh Hart as player of the year. Let's talk about Frank Mason before we get into Josh Hart. So Frank Mason put up what is just an insanely remarkable season. He puts up, like 20 points, 5 assists, something like 5 rebounds a game? Was it 4 rebounds a game? 4.2 rebounds per game. He's a good perimeter defender. He's limited because he's 5'11", but he's a good perimeter defender who, at his size of 5'11", 5'10", whatever you want to call him, shot 49% from the field, 47% from 3 on 5 attempts per game from 3, which is just wild to me that he could do that, and 80% from the foul line. He also is the unquestioned leader of a Kansas team that was probably the second or third best in the country this year. I think that Ken Pom would disagree with that, but I think that this team was probably one of the top 3 teams in all of college basketball this season, regardless of their loss to Oregon.
Yeah, I agree.
And he was the driving force behind that. He was the reason that they were able to get up and go on the break and play this faster tempo offense so consistently. Part of it was also having 3 ball handlers on the floor in Devontae Graham and Josh Jackson that could do so much. And I'll get to that in a second as kind of why I don't have him as player of the year. But he was the number one force behind them being able to get up and change what they wanted to do this year and, really get up and go. He had a 62% true shooting percentage, a 10% defensive rebounding rate, which, again, for high usage guards, these numbers are really ridiculous. A 12% turnover rate for a guy that had the ball in his hands constantly and was constantly attacking. He's fearless. He was the guy that you wanted with the ball in his hands at the end of the game. If you have him at number 1 on your player of the year list, as I believe that you do, Jeff, I'm not going to say otherwise. You can absolutely make a very strong case for Frank Mason, and I will let you continue to do that now.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that you already said. I think he was the best player on arguably the best team in the country for most of the season. I think he was the unquestioned leader of that team. I think he was impactful on both sides of the ball, obviously more so offensively than defensively, but his ability to put ball pressure on opposing guards was a factor, and I certainly don't think he was someone who you took lightly as a defender. When I'm looking at player of the year, I kind of try to look for, iconic moments that guys have during the season, things that I might remember a couple years later when, the season otherwise is a blur. I think Lonzo had a couple of those. I think one in particular, the way that he locked up Dylan Brooks and took on that defensive challenge at the end of that Oregon game, in addition to also hitting, probably the biggest shot of that game, that deep 3-pointer. I think those are things that you might remember for years to come with him from his UCLA career. I think Frank Mason had a bunch of those moments this year. I think the shot that he hit to beat Duke is certainly one of them. I think the comeback that he led against West Virginia, the 14-point rally in 3 minutes at the end of the game. I think that we'll remember that. Even the one a couple days later to beat Baylor and Waco. I think that that's something that you'll remember about Frank Mason. And to me, the other thing, I know that shouldn't necessarily come into play for a player of the year vote, but I love his story, and I love kind of, where he came from. The idea that someone who was, basically going to Townsend had he not failed a government class his senior year could go from, a low major recruit to catching the eye of Kansas at a prep school. or I guess at a AAU tournament over the summer and then at a prep school, and go from that to, being a surprisingly impactful freshman to, a very impactful sophomore and junior to maybe the best player in the country as a senior. I kind of like that the developmental stages, and when you add into that the moments that he produced as a senior, and the fact that he was the unquestioned leader and best player on maybe the best team, he would have my player of the year vote, I think.
Yeah. And this is where I'm going to kind of start to talk about why I have Josh Hart at number one. So Frank Mason this year had an unquestionably great season as the leader of a Kansas team. He also had the luxury, I think, of having, again, Devontae Graham and Josh Jackson to take the load off of his shoulders occasionally, in a way that Josh Hart never had that luxury. So like Frank Mason, if he wanted to take a couple of possessions off defensively in order to, kind of recharge his batteries for the importance of his offensive game, he was able to do that because they had a lot of really switchable players defensively. Josh Hart put up very similar numbers to what Frank Mason did. Out of all four of the National Player of the Year candidates, Josh Hart had the highest PER at 28.3. He also was probably the most important player to his team in terms of what he did on a night in, night out basis. So he had a 27.8 usage rate offensively. He matched that with a 62% true shooting percentage, which was, just minuscule, percentage points behind what Frank Mason did. Way better rebounder, relatively similar in terms of passing. Frank Mason was a slight step ahead, but Josh Hart averaged 3 assists a game this year too because he had the ball in his hand so much. Then you add to the fact that he was integral into what they were doing defensively. He was probably their most important defender, in my opinion, because he was able to switch onto fours whenever they were just overpowering Mikal Bridges because Bridges is so skinny still. He was able to, take on switches defensively in that scheme. He was able to take on the other team's toughest assignment regularly. And he had to do it every night because, like you said, Villanova had, 6.5 guys that they felt confident in regularly. This was not a deep team, and because of that, he had to bring it every single night for Villanova to have a chance. And I think that shows up in terms of the way that he performed throughout the year. This was a guy that I believe never fell below double figures in a game this season, even in like the early games against like Lafayette or College of Charleston or whatever, or in the NCAA tournament against Mount St. Mary's whenever that game was, I know it was close in the first half, but ultimately wasn't really going to end up being close. He scores 19 points on 9 field goal attempts against Wisconsin, and everyone's going to remember the fact that at the end of the game, he has the ball stripped from him. And, I think it was multiple times, really, he had the ball stripped from him in the last 2 minutes. When in reality, that game for him was incredible. He brought it every single night for a team that desperately needed him to bring it every single night. And I know that Jalen Brunson was probably the third best player in the Big East, second best player in the Big East this year behind Josh Hart. But the value to his team that Josh Hart brought overshadows the value that Frank Mason did, because Frank Mason had the other guys that could actually just take a load off of his shoulders in a way.
I definitely can't argue with the idea that Frank Mason had more help than Josh Hart had. Like I said, if you want to make an argument for Josh Hart, I cannot argue with that. I don't think that there is a huge discrepancy between Mason, Hart, Ball, and even Swanigan, although I think the defensive end of the floor probably puts him a clear fourth for me. The other three, I don't think I can make a case for Lonzo as number one, so maybe I should have Lonzo at third instead of at second, as we've discussed this, because I do think you can make a case for Josh Hart, and I do think you can make a case for Frank Mason. So, but I mean, the overarching thing that I take from this Player of the Year race is it's just so much more wide open than any one I can remember, and I'm not sure if that's because we, haven't had one guy jump out, and like there have been more All-American caliber seasons as opposed to Player of the Year caliber seasons, or if just all of these guys have been, so good that. Maybe there's just more candidates than usual this year. I'm not sure what the reason is for that, but I don't remember a decision that's been this difficult in the last 6-7 years that I've been doing this.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that this is an incredibly difficult decision. I think that it more has to do with the fact that I think these guys are more All-American level than like National Player of the Year level. I
agree.
I think Frank Kaminsky in 2015, I believe that was when he won it, probably would have outpaced all of these candidates if he did similar things. Both
Yep.
Buddy Hield and Denzel Valentine, I think probably both outpaced this group of candidates last season as well.
Yep.
Just to kind of like compare Frank Mason and Josh Hart, who I end up, kind of saying that you could vote for either, but I'm going to side toward Hart. Hart ends up scoring slightly more points per 100 possessions on very, very similar level of efficiency. I believe it's like 0.03 of a point in terms of what their efficiency was. Has slightly fewer assists. He averages 2.6 assists less per 100 possessions. Gets more steals. I think that he ends up way outpacing in rebounds, probably like doubles him in rebounds. Then I think whenever you throw in the fact that Frank Mason, again, is not a bad defender. I think he's actually a really good defender for his size. Josh Hart just brings a lot more utility defensively. He brings a lot more value defensively just because he's able to switch on anyone 1 through 4 in the college game. And really, he can shut down anyone on the wing defensively, particularly in the college game as well. Whereas Frank Mason, he's more of a pesky guy at the point of attack that really can just knock your offense out of it. So that's why I'm going Josh Hart. And like Jeff said, Jeff can easily go Frank Mason, and I think he made a very compelling argument for Frank Mason during his portion of that discussion as well. Do you want to talk Coach of the Year? Who do you have as Coach of the Year?
I had wavered all year between Mark Few and Sean Miller. At the end of the regular season, I said Sean Miller. I can still make a very strong case for Sean Miller. I don't know. To me, it's still between those two. Like what Sean did with a freshman heavy roster that lost Alonzo Trier for 19 games, and not only lost him for 19 games, but like had that story basically hovering over them for the first 2/3 of the season. Will they get him back? Won't they get him back? Yeah. Is he ever going to play again in an Arizona uniform? To get that team through that stretch, 17-2, despite losing Naismith to a career-ending knee injury. That was a 5-star freshman who likely would have started and certainly would have been an impact player for them. And then also even, looking back a little further, losing Terrence Ferguson to eligibility issues / turning pro over the offseason. That was a guy who they would have counted on for outside shooting, which certainly would have helped this roster. So, to get them through that stretch at 17-2, reintegrate Alonzo Trier into the rotation at midseason in the midst of their toughest stretch in Pac-12 play, also deal with a handful of other small injuries, and win the Pac-12 or share the Pac-12 with Oregon and then win it outright in the conference tournament. And then, look, like the Sweet 16 run, that's not what they were hoping for. They were obviously hoping to get to a Final Four. I do think he got out-coached in the Sweet 16 game against Xavier, and I think he admitted as much. I don't think they handled the zone very well. I don't think they got good shots down the stretch. Obviously the failure to get Lauri Markkanen a shot in the last 11 minutes, that was less than ideal. And I think they would like to have a few of the shots that they took back in the last few minutes after they took that lead, that late 8-point lead that they let slip away. So if that loses Sean the Coach of the Year, I would definitely give it to Mark Few. For the reasons that we've already discussed, going, within one bad 7-minute stretch against BYU in the regular season finale of being an undefeated Final Four team right now. I think it's tough to argue with that as a Coach of the Year choice. To me, either one of those guys are very deserving.
Yeah, I don't blame you for going with Mark Few or Sean Miller, really. I'm not someone that gets super caught up in Coach of the Year voting, to be honest. I would vote for Mark Few as well. But I have one question for you here on Coach of the Year. Whenever you're voting for Coach of the Year, how much do you think program building, such as recruiting, such as bringing in the right guys via transfer, even like off the floor issues and stuff like that, should play into an award like Coach of the Year? Or do you think it should solely be based on, you have the roster you have, this is how you performed, on paper via like X's and O's and things like that? How much do you think the former should play into Coach of the Year voting?
I think roster building is a huge part of Coach of the Year in college basketball. Like, I get it in the NBA or, in a professional sport if it's not, but like, you don't have a general manager building your roster in college basketball. That's like 70% of the job, if not more. So, I absolutely think that, recruiting the right players, finding guys who fit your system, putting together an intelligent roster, that absolutely has to play a role in the decision. And, I think that's something that Mark Few has done as well or better than anyone in the country this year.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And on some level, I think it's probably why John Calipari has been underrated as a coach throughout the entirety of his career, essentially. I don't think it's the same with Roy Williams as well. I think that development should also play a major factor. Just sheer player development is such a significant role whenever you're talking about 18 to 22-year-olds that probably goes underrated whenever you're discussing Coach of the Year on the college game. So I think that it's an interesting discussion nonetheless. Like I said, there are so many good freaking college basketball coaches in the country that it's impossible to, over a 1-year sample, try and come up with like the best one, I think. Don't you think?
Oh, no question. I mean, there's tons of guys that we didn't mention. Jay Wright did a great job. The staff at SMU did a great job. I mean, whatever. Like, there's a dozen guys that you could mention on this list. Those two in particular were just two whose jobs the jobs that they did this year jumped out at me.
Yeah, like Bob Huggins, Scott Drew. Rick Pitino. I guess that the off the floor stuff probably should still be held against him a little bit, but the way that he brought a team back from last year's issues and took a group of guys that were still rising in terms of freshmen to sophomores, developed them and created a top 10 team in the country, I think deserves mention as well. Coach K, Chris for Collins, sure. Let me tell you. There's more than a dozen guys for sure. Oh, I was making a joke about Coach K.
Well, yeah, I cut you off in the middle of the joke, unfortunately. But yeah, Coach K probably not his finest season this year.
No, but yeah, no, you bring up a couple of really great candidates there as well. Jeff, do you have anything that you want to plug before we get out of here and before I see you down in Phoenix this week?
Got a piece coming up later this week. It'll probably be out tomorrow night or Tuesday night, I should say, on basically how the secret to Gonzaga's success or the unsung aspect to Gonzaga's success has been that developmental year and the idea that I kind of discussed earlier that the Kelly Olynyk redshirt year and subsequent season has sort of been the linchpin to a new talent source for Gonzaga that brought them Kyle Wiltshire, brought them Nigel Williams-Goss, brought them Jonathan Williams, and has kind of pushed them to the precipice of this Final Four.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really, really good topic. I'm going to write something on Gonzaga's roster whenever we get down there. I also just want to shout out that entire coaching staff because, Tommy Lloyd does a great job. He's known for international recruiting, but he's also just a great basketball coach there. Donnie Daniels, Brian Michelson, those guys have done an incredible job with Mark Few over the years. And I think that Mark Few particularly would want them to get more recognition than they probably do as assistants.
Agree.
So this is going to be it for the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher, Android, anywhere that you get podcasts. I would really appreciate some iTunes reviews, ratings, anything that you can do to support the podcast. That's the best way to do it, to be honest, because if you do it over there, it kind of gets our name out. It gets us on the charts. More people listen when we're on the charts. So I would really appreciate it if you could leave some ratings and reviews, because that really helps the show. We'll be back probably at some point over the next couple of days. It's a long week, so who knows how many podcasts we're going to do before the Final Four on Saturday. But again, thank you to everyone for listening. I really appreciate all of the people who regularly listen to me spout nonsense about basketball. It goes very noticed, and it's very appreciated. So until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.